Hey guys, what's going on? I just finished watching UFC 266, amazing fight card. One of those cards that make me, a bigger fan of MMA. This is why I'm a fan of the MMA sport. That's where you see uh, fighters showing their true grit. When you see that, when you see these fighters making sacrifices, some of them making comebacks after years of inactivity, and the dominant champions still dominating, and contenders stepping up, and I mean, this fight card had it all. It had it all. I love the main event. I thought that was the fight of the night. But I'm here to talk about the return of Nick Diaz. Um, Man, it was bittersweet to watch that fight because I was expecting to see vintage Nick Diaz. Really, vintage Nick Diaz was not there. The layoff for Nick Diaz counted. It was a factor. You could tell he fought Robbie Lawler. It was a rematch. They fought each other back in 2004, almost 18 years ago. That's unbelievable. And Nick Diaz back then, 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago, he was suspended for using, smoking weed, something like that, and he was given a very excessive punishment, penalty for it. He was suspended, I think, 5 years, and but basically back then, Nick Diaz was burnt out. He had gotten a title fight against GSP, and the fight was a dud. It wasn't really, it didn't live up to expectations. Then he had another dud fight with Carlos Condit, and his last fight was against Anderson Silva, and those were like awful, really not good fights. It wasn't the dominant Nick Diaz that we saw back in Strikeforce. That said, he was, like I said, he was already burned out, and he was out for a long time, and you could tell he was like, because I follow him in Instagram, and he the what he portrayed was that he was done with the sport. Basically, he just stepped away from it. His brother Nate Diaz basically took the mantle of the dominant Diaz brothers, and he got super fights, money fights against Conor McGregor. You know the history of all those fights, and Nick Diaz was in the background. I follow him on Instagram, and he was always partying. He was always in Vegas, in parties, clubbing, smoking, drinking, womanizing, hanging out. And when you do that year after year, um, even if you're a badass like Nick Diaz, I'm sure he was still cycling, maybe training in jiu-jitsu and all that. But he wasn't in that, fight bubble, in that fight game bubble. There were instances where he cornered Nate Diaz in several fights, but he wasn't fully into the MMA picture. Maybe angry at the system, angry at UFC, angry at that long ass suspension that he got back then, and he was basically um, away and wasn't training properly. And what happens is that when you go ahead and just dedicate your life to the nightlife, to the party life, and that's what he showed on Instagram. That's what I'm going for when I say this. Um, you surround yourself with people that are not in the fight bubble and in the MMA bubble that he used to be. So that animal instinct, um, you kind of lose it. And I was hoping to see it. They made that UFC made this rematch against Robbie Lawler for his return fight, for Nick Diaz return fight, and I was very intrigued, because Nick Diaz is one of those fighters that got me into MMA. I love the way he approached the game, no nonsense, came in that ring to fight all the time. Amazing gas tank, amazing cardio, granite chin, um, determination. Always didn't let anybody kick his ass. He brought it. former Strikeforce champion, just one of those exciting fighters. He's a legend of the MMA sport, still is, and he was scheduled to fight tonight against Robbie Lawler, and Robbie Lawler, another animal, man, another beast, another um, legendary welterweight champion. He had an amazing run. His fights were never boring. Um, Grit for days. Just an amazing fighter, and it was. Um, a lot of people, maybe some people didn't like it, but I thought it was a good matchup. Even Nick Diaz thought that the match didn't make sense. I thought it did make sense. It didn't make sense for Nick Diaz to be paired up against an up and coming fighter. Um, it didn't make sense for him to get an instant title shot either, So I think this was the best course of action from it was good matchmaking, and Robbie Lawler took it very seriously. He trained hard. He looked in great shape, very focused, very no nonsense. He wanted to get that win back. He that because that loss he had it back in 2004. He wanted to get that back, and even though he denied it in interviews and maybe he played it off, no man, that was in his head, and he wanted to take that win back. And he did. He did tonight. Um, their fight was scheduled to be 5 rounds, and the first round is just Lawler came and he was ready, man. He came with the pressure. He put his hands on Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz, in all the 3 rounds, he was backed up against the fence. He did throw, he did land some of his vintage, striking. A lot of body shots were landed pretty good. But Lawler was ready, man. He was ready. He was taking them, and he was returning fire, and it was a very back and forth fight. But I could tell, like, at the end of the first round, you know, sometimes body language is very obvious, and I could tell that Lawler was ready to go. He was ready to go. He trained hard, and you could tell in his body language, in the way he was moving around, the way he was jumping, the way he was looking at Nick Diaz, and pacing back and forth. The guy was ready for war, and at the end of that first round, when they both went their separate way, that bell rung, the body language for Nick Diaz was completely different. He kind of looked defeated, to be honest. He looked defeated. He looked down on himself. Uh, it wasn't that Nick Diaz from before. That angry Nick Diaz with a chip on his shoulder, uh, not ready to get his ass kicked by anybody, ready to just bring it and smell blood and finish that opponent. That Nick Diaz was not there. I'm not gonna. I wanted to see him. Wanted to see that vintage type of Nick Diaz, but he just wasn't there. He was a broken man, and I think Robbie Lawler broke him. Robbie Lawler broke him in the third round. Nick Diaz just could not answer the ref's call to get up. It was a weird kind of thing. He grabbed his knee, but to me, it pains me to say, I think Nick Diaz gave up. Robbie Lawler broke him. Just it was weird. It was weird to see a Nick Diaz tired, a Nick Diaz that didn't return, um, didn't answer that call when the ref was telling him, "Can you go on? Can you get up?" And he kind of just waved it off. I know Nick Diaz is gonna look back at that loss, and it's gonna hurt him. So either he does two things. He didn't look like he was making excuses at the end of the fight. It looked like he was giving Robbie Lawler the props that he deserved. He brought it. He kept alluding to the fact that I knew I was gonna pay for it, and all this stuff. And I think it has to do with the fact of that party life that he had for 6+ years. That added up, and I'm sure he trained for this fight, but He just very different. He didn't look uh, in the shape that Robbie Lawler looked. Robbie Lawler looked reborn, motivated. Nick Diaz didn't look motivated at all. In his interview, he didn't look motivated. He was saying, "What the hell am I doing here? What the, you know?" And you gotta take a fighter seriously when he talks to the camera like that. When he's being interviewed, and he's telling you that he's not feeling that motivation. And I could think of many reasons why he maybe didn't feel that that motivation anymore. I feel that maybe he has kind of alluded in several interviews that his brother Nate Diaz has taken a lot of fights that should have been his, and Nate Diaz is also became, like I mentioned earlier, the forefront Diaz brother. You know, the guy getting paid millions, and in the meantime, Nick Diaz was in the background. He wasn't getting paid. He was suspended. He was away from the game, and he just you know, they both went on separate ways. And although I'm sure Nick Diaz feels proud for his little brother, I'm sure he loves them and wants nothing but the best for him. Brothers, there's competitiveness. I think that's natural, and and it's true. There's a lot of fights that Nate Diaz took that should have been fights uh, that belong to Nick Diaz. It's just that, well, Nick Diaz, what can you do? I mean, he was suspended, and it just didn't go that way, you know. So um, tonight it was just bittersweet to me because I'm a fan of. I'm glad that Robbie Lawler got that back, that he won, and he looked good. He looked motivated. Robbie Lawler dominated. He dominated Nick Diaz in all the 3 rounds that they fought. I believe it was 3 rounds. I hope I'm not wrong about that. Another thing is that Nick Diaz also, um, his coaching was, his coaches were different. His stand-up coach was some guy there, some young guy. He wasn't the stand-up coach that they used to have. Forgive me, I don't know his name. He's an older guy. He's the guy that's always, you know, the striking coach for Nate Diaz. You know, I was surprised it wasn't the striking for Nick. So I don't know. Something's going on in the background there. Something happened. Something was off, and but ultimately, uh, tonight was just one of those nights that it was the night that tonight is the historic night where Nick Diaz did not show up. You know, I wanted to see the vintage guy. He wasn't there, and there's a lot of factors that I mentioned, and but mainly, or I think mainly has to do with the people that Nick Diaz is surrounding himself with. Maybe he's surrounding himself with a lot of yes men, a lot of guys that just do whatever he says, and you know, it's the same old story. Something that happened also with that's happening with Conor McGregor and other fighters who BJ Penn, who end up surrounding themselves with yes people, and they don't, and the people training them are not pushing them the way they're supposed to be pushed, and that motivation is not there. And I think when Nick Diaz said, "I'm paying for it," I think he was talking about that, you know, about not being in the game 100%, and all those years that he just, you know, he surrounded himself with party people instead of fighting people. And maybe Nate told him, "Hey, get back to this because eventually you're gonna fight again," and you know, those things happen. So, anyways, it was a bittersweet fight to watch, like I said. But I'm glad for Robbie Lawler, and I would love to see Robbie Lawler fight somebody like Masvidal, you know, a pair up like that. But from what I heard, he doesn't want to fight Masvidal because they used to train together or something like that. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. Those are my thoughts on the Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler fight, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did watching that fight, even though I didn't see what I wanted to see, you know. But it happens. It happens. I hope Nick Diaz doesn't retreat and comes back stronger, motivated and he kicks ass again. He needs that chip on his shoulder. He needs that anger, that hard